This is Jill Pack with the Seasons of Joy podcast. This is episode 129, entitled Peacebuilding with Patrick Mason. Are you a woman of faith who is struggling to navigate your current season of life? Do you feel like life is just happening to you instead of for you? My name is Jill Pack, and I'm a certified faith-based life coach and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I want you to know that no matter your season or your circumstance, it is possible to create a more joyful life, and I would love to show you how. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, my friends. Welcome to this week's podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I am really looking forward to sharing with you the interview that I mentioned last week on the podcast. I'm going to be sharing with you a conversation that I recently had with Dr. Patrick Mason. Patrick Mason is a professor, an author, and a historian, and he teaches religious studies and history at Utah State University. He is the author and editor of several books, most recently Proclaim Peace and Restoration. I followed Patrick Mason for a long time, and I've read quite a few of his books, and I've heard him speak, and each time I do, I come away inspired to be a peace builder. Before I share this conversation, however, I wanted to remind you that if you're feeling overwhelmed with the unique challenges and opportunities that come with this season of life that you are in, I've got you. I'm continuing to offer what I like to call a clarity conversation. It's a one-on-one conversation where we dive into whatever is on your mind and we work together to help you gain some clarity and fresh perspectives. So if you're ready to dive deeper into what I'm talking about on the podcast, I'm here to help. So just click on the link found in the show notes or visit my website, www.seasons-coaching.com, and click on the Work With Me tab. I also am really excited about something else I'm offering. It's something fun in honor of my birthday that's coming in a couple of weeks. So November is a celebration month, and we're also approaching the holiday season as well. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. So what I'm going to be offering is called the Season of Light, 12 Days to Relationship Renewal. I am so excited to share this with you. Its purpose is to help you strengthen the relationships in your life, whether it's the relationship that you have with yourself, with others, or God. And I have included the link in the show notes for you to grab this powerful resource to help you add more light into your relationships. So now on to this week's episode. All right, I am sitting down with Dr. Patrick Mason, and we are going to be talking about peace building. So I'm going to turn the time over to you, Patrick, and let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to just share a few minutes with you this morning. So yeah, I'm Patrick Mason. I'm a professor here at Utah State University, and I teach classes in religion and in history and in peace building as well. We have a new Peace Institute here at Utah State that I'm really excited about. And I definitely come from a Latter-day Saint perspective. I'm, lifelong active member of the church, so that informs a lot of the way I think about these kinds of things. And I've written a lot about the intersections of the gospel and peace and peacemaking, and try to incorporate that in my life, sometimes more successfully than others. And maybe just on the personal side, I'm married, we've got 4 kids. We're very much in the thick of it, 3 high schoolers
Wow.
And yeah, so sometimes finding peace at home is the most difficult thing.
Yeah.
Maybe some of your listeners can relate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, awesome. Well, and you're the chair, actually, right? The name left me.
Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, the specific position I hold, it's called the Leonard Arrington Chair of Mormon History and Culture. So a lot of my research and writing and teaching is around Latter-day Saint history. And so, yeah, Utah State is great. It's one of a handful of places around the country that has a professorship just dedicated to Latter-day Saint history.
Yeah, I love it. So people don't know this, but I've been sitting in on one of your classes for this semester. I've had to miss a few for different reasons, but for the
Yeah.
most part, I'm there. And I can honestly say it's been such a beautiful experience in the fact that it's been a lot of years since I graduated Utah State, but so fellow Aggie, but it's been a really good, I think for me, as I've reflected on this semester so far, is you have a really beautiful way of telling the hard stuff, but also from a very expansive view where there's room for the nuance. There's room for, really understanding all sides of the issue. And I don't know, I think that's a tribute to you that you can relay such it's Black history, it's Black in American history is the topic. So it's kind of a heavy one,
Yeah.
but I've just been really impressed with how you've been able to present it in such a expansive way. I've learned so much. I'm glad
Yeah.
I don't have to take any tests
Right.
or
Right.
anything, but it's just I feel like I'm a better person having learned some of that stuff that I either wasn't taught or overlooked because I was, young and
Yep.
my brain wasn't fully developed at the time.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's kind of fun to go back as an adult and relearn some of those things from that different perspective.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I'm so glad you're in the class. And I love that, that thirst for knowledge and wanting to come back and learn more and get new perspectives. And that's one of the things that actually history has done for me is, I mean, it's my profession, it's what I do. So there's all those kind of professional sides of it. But on the human side, it's helped me to think about complexity. It's helped me think about, as I really dive into history. And I mean, I'm interested not just in the facts and dates and so forth. I'm interested in the human side of it. I'm interested in the human stories. And guess what? Humans were complex in the past, just like they're complex now. And people did bad things and good things, oftentimes on the same day. And so I'm not really interested in a story that tries to identify heroes and villains. I don't think history is a Marvel movie.
mhm.
Uh, it's just much richer than that. And so actually so I try to take that empathy back into history that I study and I teach and I write about, but I try to do the other way too. All that complexity that I see in history, I use that to help remind me about kind of in a current moment or a current day where everything seems overwhelming or black and white, or I'm inclined to turn people into villains, that actually I take some of those lessons and say, well, maybe it's complex now, just like it was in the past too. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective because I think that will tie really well into this idea of peace,
Yeah.
right? Because the complexity is the truth. And when we try to make it too simple, like you said, it's so easy to pit one person against another. And then in the end, that doesn't really help us as a people to do what we're meant to do here on this earth.
Yeah. It
Um,
doesn't get us to peace, right? It just
doesn't
turns
get us to peace. It
into
does the
endless
opposite.
competition, winners and
Yeah.
losers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note, I'd love for you to describe to listeners or like what you would define, like what is the definition of peace? What is it that maybe we all crave, but how do we articulate it? What is that?
Yeah. It's such a deceptively simple question and deceptively simple term. I tend to think of peace not as the absence of conflict. Sometimes we think like if I just got rid of all the conflict in my life, then I would have peace. Maybe, but I also think that that's like, first of all, it's pretty unrealistic. I think in the world that we live in, first of all, conflict is just built into natural creation, right? You've got land and water, day and night. I mean, we just live in a world of difference, and that's what makes it interesting. If everything was the same color, if everybody were the same gender, if everybody spoke the same language, if I eat the same food every day, right? If there was just total sameness, the world would be boring. I actually think it wouldn't fulfill the measure of its creation. I think God introduced all of this diversity and difference into the world because it's beautiful. So I think of peace not as getting rid of all that difference, all that tension, all that conflict, but actually learning how to engage it constructively. How to for me, peace is fundamentally about relationships and wholeness. And so it's being at whole. And sometimes that might mean in myself. Sometimes I'm actually divided against myself. And so inner peace, I think, is finding a kind of wholeness. Again, not getting rid of the tensions inside of myself, but finding a way to embrace it and constructively engage that. And the same thing in relationships with other people. Obviously, it's easier said than done, but that I think is the vision that I've really come to is it's not about resolving conflict either. We talk about conflict resolution, and obviously some things we do want to resolve. We want to get out of the fight or something like that. But ultimately, I don't want to resolve all the conflicts in my life. I want to transform them into something healthier and more constructive and more engaging, because I don't want to lose the difference that other person brings to the table. I don't want to get rid of them. I don't want to resolve them. I actually want to find ways for us to engage more constructively.
Yeah, I love that you put it that way. We don't want to resolve them or fix them or right. We want to find the common ground. We want to see their humanity.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy in a time like this is when we don't embrace the complexity, we remove the humanity of each other, right? We don't see people as people. And when that ends, like that's where kindness and compassion and empathy go out the door too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that. I love that perspective. I was listening to your most recent podcast. Well, it wasn't the most recent one. It had Thomas McConkie on it.
Yeah.
And I thought like that discussion, sometimes he's super deep for me. I have to
Yes,
like,
right.
I
For
have to
all of
put
us,
my, I
not
have to
just
like,
you.
I have to really savor, let it sink in.
Yeah.
But the thing that resonated with me, and I think that it adds to this conversation is, and you touched on it, is that inner peace.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, I believe that that's really where peace is found at the most basic and almost deep level too. It's like without inner peace, what do we have? Like, are we able to even build peace if we don't have it within? And one of the things he touched on was just that the wholeness. And you touched on that in your kind of your vision of what peace is like when we can understand the wholeness of ourselves, how does that in effect ripple out to our families, our communities, the country as a whole, the world as a whole? If we all really understood who we are and who created us,
Yeah.
right? Like the basic of all things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've sort of come to this maybe a little bit late. Maybe I'm a little bit of a slow learner, but I talked about I think on that in that same conversation with Thomas that I actually got a master's degree in peace studies, in international peace studies at the University of Notre Dame, and it's one of the great programs in the country to teach about peace and peace building. I didn't even know there was such a thing, and then I discovered it, and it was amazing. It changed my life in lots of ways. But that program in particular is really focused on international peace studies. So it brought in students from all around the world who are dealing, with like really serious conflict. There are wars in the world, right? I mean, there are terrible things and civil wars and other kinds of violent conflict. And that's what we were really focused on. And so all these students from around the world, and we got great training, amazing, really amazing sort of conceptual and technical knowledge and so forth. But one of the things I've realized in retrospect, and part of it came through some conflicts that came up among the group, among the alumni, especially around the Israel-Gaza conflict. But what I've really realized over the years is that I don't think I got enough training about that kind of inner peace. That they was so focused on, and it's always easy to like point outward. Right. We can read the newspaper. We see the problems, right? In other countries, in our country, right? And in our communities, in our wards, in our families, it's always easy to point at what other people are doing or to see other things. And that's, it is important. There are conflicts out there. I think we shouldn't be blind, or we shouldn't bury our heads in the sand to the suffering that other people experience all around the world. But I do think that if I love a quote by the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, if we want to share peace, we have to cultivate peace in ourselves first, right? That if I want to be a peacemaker in the world, I need to do that work internally too. That doesn't mean I have to wait till I'm perfectly at peace, right? I think it's a dynamic relationship, but I can't ignore the inner work. I think that's what it comes down to. I can't just say I'm going to work on other people. I'm going to work on relationships. I'm going to work in my community. That's all fantastic, but ultimately that can be exhausting work. And so if we don't have that storehouse, that reservoir, if there isn't that kind of still deep water inside of us, then I think we get exhausted, we get frustrated, and it limits our ability to be effective peacemakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I loved when you shared that story because I think you're right. It's so easy to see it in other people, right?
Yep.
And as a life coach, it's like, I have so many people like, well, if my daughter-in-law would just be different,
Yep. If
or
the other
if my
person would just change.
mother-in-law would
Yeah.
just change, I would be happy. But the truth is, like, that's really not where we find that. It really is inside, and we cannot control another person. Like we just can't. If you figure it out, you can let me know. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we just can't. And so if we're always banking that peace will come when, I don't know that we'll find it. Because
Yeah.
we're waiting for something that's outside of ourselves that really we don't have control over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really don't.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that is it's such a hard thing to learn and to practice, right? It's so simple to say, but this is, through my reading and studying and reflecting on this, I've absolutely come to that. And for me, like, important teachers have been, again, Thich Nhat Hanh, this Buddhist monk, the Arbinger Institute. They have amazing resources on this. My colleague here at Utah State, Chad Ford, he has an amazing book called Dangerous Love, which is all about this. And so I've really learned, and frankly, and quite honestly, actually, my greatest teacher, and I don't mean this just in a kind of pious way, but I actually think my greatest teacher has been Jesus, and encountering and reading the scriptures in the New Testament and the Book of Mormon, seeing the way that he was a peacemaker, seeing the way that he reflected on the relationship of the inner state of my soul with then what I can do in the world. I mean, that's the heart of the Sermon on the Mount, right?
Yeah.
And so all of those things have completely convinced me of that. Yeah, that I have to work on myself first. I can't just point the finger outward.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so easy to do, right? It's
Yep.
so easy to do.
Yep. Yep.
That leads me to the next. I was thinking about this. I loved the podcast episode that you had on and I guess I may not have said this in the beginning, but it's called Proclaim Peace.
Mm-hmm.
And you do it with another co-host, and I've forgotten her name.
Yeah, Jen Thomas. She's
Jen
amazing.
Thomas.
She's
She's
the
amazing.
co-executive director of Mormon Women for Ethical Government.
Yeah, I love the conversations that you have, but that you were talking about the lessons of Captain Moroni and how your guest kind of directed us to the temptations of Christ and how it connected with these different challenges that Moroni faced. And at the end of that conversation, to me, what I took away was the battle isn't without.
Yeah.
The battle really isn't outside of us. It can feel that way because we see all this, the turmoil and the discord and all that stuff. But really the battle is let's not make everybody our enemy. What's the enemy within us, and what do we need to reflect on there? And I think that goes to your point of like that inner work. It's like, what do we need to work on inside that
Yeah.
helps us
Yeah.
be that peace builder?
Exactly. And that's not to minimize the actual conflicts, right? It's not to trivialize actual harms that are done, actual suffering that either you endure or that people that you love endure. All of those things are real. But I think what this approach points us toward is that we will be better equipped to transform those conflicts, to engage them constructively, if we don't come at them with a heart at war, to use the Arbinger Institute's language. if we do what Jesus says, right? If we pray for our enemies, not not so that again, not so that my daughter-in-law will change, right? Or my mother-in-law, but actually what Jesus is pointing to is that fundamentally that prayer it begins with the inner work that I don't see them as enemies.
Yeah.
I'm praying to transform them, not as enemies, but to see them as sisters and brothers, as
Mhm.
people that I'm in relationship with.
Mhm.
That when I pray for them, actually my orientation towards them changes. My prayer might not do anything to them, right?
Right.
But what it's actually doing is changing my orientation to them, so that I turn to them, which then opens up a new world of possibility. If I only see them as enemies, if then they're a category, it's a thing, right? And I can't work with that, right? Any more than I can, have a productive relationship with this wall or this desk or something like that. They're just an object when they're an enemy. And actually, maybe more than that, they're a danger. Then I'm operating out of fear, or self-protection, all these kinds of things. But when I transform them, when they're not an enemy anymore, when they are a person, when they're a fellow child of God, when they're another human being,
Mhm.
now we can start to maybe get somewhere. Again, I can't force them. It doesn't eliminate the challenges that we have, but at least it creates the horizon of possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, yeah, if you approach a conversation, like I think of conversations I've had in the past, like with my adult kids or whatever, right? When I can really see them as they are, as maybe in pain,
Yeah,
and that gives me perspective on maybe why they replied the way they did, or maybe why they have the viewpoint that they have. It just adds more understanding and compassion. But it really comes from seeing them. I love that you mentioned Chad Ford. I have read Dangerous Love so many times.
yeah,
And I love everything about the Arbinger Institute. I just
yeah.
think there's so much wisdom there. And I think that's when they break that down, just really seeing people as people and turning first. I
Yeah,
think turning first allows us to all not invite them to build peace, but really it creates space within us to have peace because
yeah, and
we're seeing differently.
and sometimes, I mean, it can sound really big and abstract and everything. Sometimes it's like really little things. Just last week, so my oldest son was having a piano recital, and we generally try to take the kids to, support each other and stuff like that. And so we told our youngest, who's 8, that, that we were taking, that we were going to the recital and that she needed to go. And she's in that phase as an 8-year-old of trying to assert her independence and all of those kinds of things. And she just like started like freaking out, like having this major tantrum, like that you're like forcing me and I don't want to, and I don't going to make my own choices and so forth. And like it was just like escalation, as we've all done with her,
Yes.
right? And and so like I like stepped away for a minute, did a little breathing and so forth, and came back like a minute later, and it sort of clicked, like she needs her independence, right? That's a fundamental need that she has right now that she's developing, and that's what this is fundamentally about. And I said, okay, and like you don't have to come. Like if you want to stay home, with one of your other older siblings, you can do that. And immediately she said, okay, well I want to go. Right? It wasn't about the recital, right?
Yes.
It
Yes.
wasn't even about coming, right? It was about something else. And once that kind of clicked, once I saw her and her needs, and then I changed my approach, actually then, I still got the outcome, that I wanted, but it wasn't about
Right.
the outcome anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was about her and about the relationship.
Yeah. It changed for you too,
Exactly.
right? Because in the
Yep.
beginning, it was about the outcome. But
Yep.
then by allowing space to see maybe what the real issue was, allowed you to make it not about the outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and like it was so much like I didn't like being in that space of conflict with her, right? Of just escalation, this conflict tornado, right?
Yeah.
And she does. She can escalate, right? She can go to zero to 60 pretty quickly, which then works on me as
Yes.
well. And so Yeah, just so sometimes it's not even big, huge things. Sometimes it's just the
Yeah.
mundane things that
Yes.
like
Yes.
every day.
It's the thing that kind of brings it to the head, but it's not actually the thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I'm glad you're learning this with the younger kids. I didn't have that luxury. I had to learn this really the real hard way.
Yeah, well, she's my last, and so I don't know. Maybe
We do.
we're
Our
we're
kids have totally different parents. Like the
yes,
oldest to the
yeah,
youngest, they
yeah,
get different parents. It just is.
yep,
And hopefully for the better, right?
yep, yeah, yeah, yeah. You hope so. Yeah,
But
mostly more exhausted in my
yeah.
case. You know.
Yeah, it's like we've really learned how to choose the battle. That's
Yeah,
that's what I've decided. But I love it. I love this conversation. If you could leave listeners with maybe some insight of like, okay, here we are. Like, it isn't always the big things, it's most likely the little things. But right now, to some people, it feels like a big thing. Like, where do we go from here? How do we, on a daily basis, just an average person, go about being a peacemaker? I'm not going to go to across the world
yeah,
to proclaim peace, even though it sounds really cool.
yeah,
But like we just live everyday lives. Like how do we proclaim peace? How do we build peace here?
yeah. Well, that I think that point is a great place to start. It's again, it's something that I've had to learn again. I've seen this program about international peace studies and I had all these dreams about, going around the world and then being a peace builder and resolving international conflicts. And that hasn't happened for me. I'm just a professor teaching some classes and I'm just a dad and live here in Logan, Utah. Right. And I'm not doing all those things. But at one point I had this insight. And again, probably much later than I should have. But but actually, God loves my 8-year-old child as much as he loves the person in Ukraine who's suffering, or in Israel, or something like that. And my 8-year-old and my relationship with my 8-year-old is just as important, maybe even more so, because that's who actually God has put immediately into my sphere. There's a way that we can kind of romanticize the distant thing and the big thing, and it's, our daily relationships are so daily, they're so mundane, they're so ordinary that I think we take them for granted, and we forget to see just how special and sacred they are. But actually, I've really come to like the most important peace building that I do really is with my wife, it's with my kids, it's with my colleagues, and it's in my community, in my ward, and in my neighborhood. Like
Mhm,
that's where God placed me. Now, again, I don't close my eyes to the rest of the world, and I want to be engaged in whatever ways that I can. But actually, most of the peace building that I do is
mhm,
very, very local and very, very personal. And so partly that shift is like what I'm doing every day is peace building. It
mhm,
is peacemaking.
mhm,
And all of these lenses apply right there. The other thing is a kind of patience that so one of my professors, John Paul Lederach, who's kind of a great kind of teacher in the field of conflict transformation, he talks about, he says, it's fundamentally about relationships, and also that it usually takes at least as long to transform a conflict as you've been in the conflict.
wow.
So if you think about this with Israelis and Palestinians, right, this is now decades long, if not longer, right? And so to think that like you could sign a piece of paper and just be done with it is foolish, right? Because fundamentally it's about relationships. So if it's a multi-generational conflict, it means that actually you have to have a generational perspective. And so the same thing in my relationships in my families, right? If you have a family conflict with a sibling,
Mhm,
right, that has lasted for decades,
mhm,
there's probably not any one conversation that's just going to change overnight,
mhm.
right? That you don't want to address the short term, and you can kind of think about a time horizon, the short term, the medium term, the long term, but actually don't be impatient with yourself that some of these things don't produce immediate results, especially when things have been when there's so much, right? There's so
Yeah.
many layers. It's like an archaeological dig,
Yeah.
right? These
Yeah.
some of these conflicts that we
Yeah.
have. And so you've got to unearth it. You've got to analyze it. You've got to make sense of it. You want to deal with that top layer while you're looking at it, right? But also recognize there's all these layers. So I think giving yourself some patience, giving other people some patience, and recognizing I'm going to deal with what I can deal with right now, but also there's a time horizon here that I have to show some patience for. That's I think been helpful for me.
I love that. I think we live in such a fast-paced society, and there's always a quick fix or the next big thing. And so I think as a result, we kind of think that things can change like that. And so I love that perspective, as it's like we got to allow the space for the change, right?
Yeah.
And really that's the point of this earth is change, is growth, is becoming. And so it isn't about hurrying and fixing it. It's about becoming more like the Savior. That's the goal. And that's going to take a lifetime, really, for most of us.
Yeah, I'm increasingly convinced that God's a slow cooker God rather than a microwave God. And so I think always having that kind of both and, right? That yes, I want to address the immediate. I want today to be better than yesterday, and I want tomorrow to be better than today. But also the relationships that I care most about are years long, decades long, maybe eternity long.
Yeah.
And so it's always that both and. I do want to address the moment, but I don't want to just only be in the it's the paradox of wanting to be in the moment but not trapped in the moment. And so that's the kind of both andness that I think we need to bring to conflict.
Yeah. I love that so much. Patrick, thank you so much for your time and your perspective. It's been really enlightening for me.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks.
So thank you for coming. And I had to work up to be brave and ask you. And you were
I try not to be too scary. So I'm glad you asked.
I was telling my husband, I came home and I'm like, I did it. I asked him. And I said, but I let out just a little wrong. It was like, will you be on my podcast? And you said, well, tell me a little bit about it. I thought, I love that answer. And it was just like, it wasn't a no. It was like, well, let me make sure I know who you are.
Yeah, right.
I'm not going to say yes right away, but anyway, it was just very kind of you to make time for me today. And I just so appreciate it. I love the work you're doing. I loved your books, your podcast. I just think you're making a difference. So thank you so much.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And good luck with all the difference you're making too.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Seasons of Joy podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends and family. If you want to learn more about me or how to work with me, just visit my website, www.seasons-coaching.com, and have a joyful week.